Hello, my name's Jeremy Houck, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. This last week I went to a new doctor, which means I got that new patient packet, 47 pages of medical history, family history, insurance information. And at the back of that packet's always pages of fine print. And I know those pages are there to protect the doctor and to let me know my rights, but truthfully, we don't ever pay a whole lot of attention to that fine print, do we? I mean, we like billboards, we like commercials, we like headlines, the large print, the things that tell us exactly what we need to know up front. They're inviting. But that fine print, that's important as well. In our study of the stories that Jesus told, today's not one of those large print kind of stories. In Luke 14, we discover Jesus is talking about the fine print, the stuff that in a doctor's office you need a magnifying glass to read. But unlike all of the fine print at the end of a contract, Jesus isn't trying to hide anything. He comes right out and says, following me will cost you everything. Everything you have, everything you are, everything you love. I wonder if you've ever noticed how people seem to love this idea of Jesus until he starts to ask for something. A lot of people are interested in Jesus right up until they realize he's not just offering inspiration, he's offering transformation. And transformation always comes at a cost. I think that's what makes this passage such a hard but beautiful passage. Jesus has no interest in trying to make himself sound more appealing. He says, before you follow me, let's make sure you understand what this means. It's brutally honest, and we desperately need that kind of honesty because it's possible for us to be around Jesus, to like Jesus, to admire Jesus, to talk about Jesus, and still not be willing to follow Jesus. Let's pick up the story in Luke chapter 14, verse 25. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus. Now, that kind of sounds like the dream if you're in ministry. I mean, you see large crowds and you think, oh, we're doing something right. Momentum is building. The seats are full. But when Jesus looks at this crowd of potential followers, people who left their homes and their jobs to chase him down, instead of handing out visitor cards, instead of saying, why don't you come back next week and bring a friend, he just starts laying out teachings that are so intense and so costly that the crowd goes silent because Jesus wants them to hear the fine print. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, his wife and children, his brother and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. I would imagine if you're standing in the crowd right now, you would have recoiled. For us, family is important. We prioritize our family dinners. We schedule vacations around seeing grandparents. But for a first century Jew, family wasn't just important. Family was your identity, your economic safety net, your honor in the community. Family was everything. You didn't have an identity apart from your family. You were the son of so-and-so, the daughter of this tribe, a member of this household. And then Jesus comes right out and says, you need to hate them. Now, right off the bat, and I'm not going to try to soften this, but we need to be clear. Jesus isn't commanding a bitter contempt for our parents, our spouse, or our children. I mean, that contradicts the entire story of Scripture. But I think there's this well-established way of expressing priority and preference, not raw emotion. Saying that you are to hate someone is a way of saying that this thing comes first and everything else is second. And the distance between the two is so great, it might as well be the distance between love and hate. When Jesus says, hate your father and mother, what the crowd heard was, your loyalty to me has to be so complete, so all-consuming, that every other loyalty, even your closest relationships, look like hatred by comparison. You ever wondered why he said it so aggressively? I think it's because he knows we don't naturally drift towards radical devotion. Nobody accidentally stumbles into a life of complete surrender. Our natural drift is compromise. We drift towards pleasing our parents because we want their approval. We drift towards prioritizing our spouse because that's the closest relationship we have here. We drift towards fitting in and keeping the peace. Jesus knows that the number one competitor for the throne of your heart isn't some evil lurking in a dark alley. The number one competitor is the person that you sleep next to, the child that eats breakfast at your table, the parent whose approval you've been chasing since you were 6 years old. These are good things, good gifts from God, but when a good thing becomes the ultimate thing, it becomes our idol. And then, just in case anybody thought that they could navigate that one, Jesus goes even deeper. In verse 26, he says, yes, even his own life. You see, Jesus isn't just after your relationships. He's after your ambitions, your rights, your carefully constructed 5-year plan. He's asking you to surrender your instinct towards self-preservation, your need for control and comfort. Following Jesus means dethroning yourself from being the center of your own universe. And if that's not uncomfortable enough, Jesus doubles down on the cost and says, and anyone who does not carry his cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. I think we've done a masterful job domesticating this verse until it's lost all of its shock value. We hear the word cross and we think tattoos or jewelry or cathedrals with soft lighting and stained glass. We've turned the cross into a symbol that looks really nice on a church logo. But jewelry never entered the mind of that original crowd. They saw an image so brutal that it turned their stomachs. They would have seen the Roman Empire's most horrifying instrument of execution. Crucifixion was not designed just to kill a person. It was designed to utterly dehumanize them. Criminals would have been beaten beyond recognition, naked and bloodied, forced to carry their own cross through a jeering, mocking crowd as they stumbled to the place of their execution. It was public and humiliating. In the honor-shame culture of that first century, where your reputation was your social currency, that kind of public humiliation wasn't just embarrassing, it was devastating. There's no way to hide your shame. Everybody watched, everybody knew. So when Jesus says, carry your cross and follow me, he's not saying add me to your already busy life as a spiritual accessory. He's not saying just endure that difficult coworker with a smile. He's calling us to come and die to our reputation, to our individualism, to our personal kingdom. That's the cost of the cross. That's not a piece of jewelry that you put on. That's a life that you lay down. Are you beginning to understand why Jesus needed to say this before he went any farther? I mean, if you sign up for one thing and you get another thing, you don't just feel disappointed, you feel betrayed. And betrayal makes people walk away, not just from Jesus, but from any hope of faith at all. Jesus is doing something profoundly kind here, even though it doesn't feel kind in the moment. He's telling the truth about the cost before he offers the contract. He's showing us the fine print before we sign. His desire is that we remain faithful, not just show up on the first day. As you can imagine, the crowd's beginning to get uncomfortable. The energy starts to shift. The excitement of being in that crowd, listening to Jesus, is starting to fade. It's being replaced by this heavy, sobering weight. And Jesus, knowing exactly what's going on in their hearts, does something brilliant. He tells 2 short stories that take this abstract idea of counting the cost and he makes it amazingly practical. The 2 parables speak the same truth to 2 very different personality types, 2 different ways that we try to avoid the cost. The first one begins, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Will he not first sit down and estimate the cost to see if he has enough money to complete it? For if he lays the foundation and is not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and was not able to finish. In the ancient world, towers were serious. They're not decorative. Farmers would build them so that workers could watch over the crop around the clock, protecting it from thieves and animals. It's this very public act. Your neighbors watched, your community paid attention, which means that if you started and you couldn't finish, everybody knew. You'd have this half-built structure just sitting in a field, abandoned and incomplete, a monument to poor planning. That kind of public humiliation wasn't just embarrassing, it was defining. Your kids and grandkids carried that reputation with them. I think Jesus is talking to the emotional follower, the person who gets swept up in the moment. They hear the music, they feel the chills run down their spine, and before they've really thought about it, they're all in. They're riding this wave of spiritual emotion, and it feels incredible. Now, don't get me wrong, emotional zeal is not a bad thing. But I think Jesus is asking, have you sat down and calculated what it's actually going to cost you to follow me? You've heard the application of this passage before. It's the gym in January. You know, the first week, the gym is absolutely packed. Everybody's motivated. Everybody's wearing their new workout gear. They got a new water bottle. And by February, the crowd has dropped to about half. And in April, well, it's the same 10 people that were in there in December. Why? Because the emotional decision to join a club didn't come with a calculation of what it really cost. I mean, it's not only going to cost you the membership fee, but you got to get up early, you're going to be sore, you're going to say no to the donuts in the break room. Nobody counts that. They just feel the emotion and swipe their credit card. Jesus is looking for something different. He doesn't want the January crowd, he wants the October crowd, the people still showing up. Because here's what happens to the emotional follower who never counts the cost. They start building a tower of faith with great joy. And then Jesus says something difficult. He talks about the way they spend their money or the way they treat their spouse or the things they're looking at in the dark when no one else is watching. Rest assured that Jesus will ask for changes that are actually going to hurt. When it costs them a friendship because their old friends don't understand the new direction, the scaffolding comes down. When Jesus says, quit gossiping and talking about other people, open your home to a difficult person, give your time, your talent, your treasure to the kingdom. Suddenly, building a tower loses its appeal. You're left with a monument to an emotional decision that didn't have the foundation of a calculated commitment. Jesus isn't trying to trick anyone into following him. This is not some kind of free trial where you give him your credit card and just they hope that you forget about the membership. This is profoundly loving, even if it sounds harsh. Don't sing about it. Don't feel it. Sit down, take out the ledger, and do the sober, serious, grown-up math of what it means to call him Lord. Because Jesus doesn't want your half-finished tower. He wants your whole life from now until the end. And then a masterful move, Jesus flips the audience. He goes from a builder to a king, from a very enthusiastic starter to a very different personality type. Or suppose a king is about to go to war against another king. Will he not first sit down and consider whether he is able with 10,000 men to oppose one coming against him with 20,000? If he is not able, he will send a delegation while the other is still a long way off and will ask for terms of peace. A builder builds for personal benefit. If he fails, it's personally embarrassing. But a king, he represents an entire nation. His throne, his dynasty, his kingdom's entire future is hanging in the balance. If a builder miscalculates, he loses money, he gets mocked. If a king miscalculates, cities burn, soldiers die. The stakes in this parable are not lost on the crowd. They're in a world loaded with political tension. A lot of Jewish people are waiting for somebody to rise up and to overthrow the Roman government. Revolution is constantly in the air. So when Jesus tells a story about a king with 10,000 soldiers staring across the field at a king with 20,000 soldiers, everybody in that crowd did the math. This parable is aimed at the proud, the self-sufficient, the skeptical, the person who's standing there in the crowd with their arms crossed and they pride themselves on being smart and calculated. The person who won't come to Jesus because they believe faith is for people who can't reason things out for themselves, who think surrender is for folks who aren't strong enough to fight their own battles. And Jesus says, all right, fine. You want to talk about strategy? Let's just sit down and we'll do the math together. You're marching against sin, against the grave. And you're doing that with an army of 10,000, your own willpower, your own moral efforts, your own religious resume. And you're marching against the king of the universe. And he has an army of 20,000 at least. So you run the numbers. You're not going to win this war. Your 10,000 is no match for his 20,000. The king is coming. He is the one with all of the power, all of the authority, all of the resources in the universe, and he's moving towards you. The question has never been, can you win? That question was answered a long time ago. The only question is, are you going to be smart enough, humble enough to stop while there's still time and say, I'm done fighting. What are your terms? So what's the right move? What does the king do? Well, he sends a delegation. He asks for terms of peace. He humbles himself and surrenders. And he ends up saving his kingdom, not by grit, but by determination. He saves his kingdom by admitting his weakness and throwing himself on the mercy of the opposing king. Counting the cost for the proud skeptic doesn't mean tallying up all the things they'll have to give up. For the king, counting the cost means understanding what you lose if you refuse to surrender. It means honestly looking at the gap between who God is and where you are and realizing that you're hopelessly outmatched. Your morality is not going to save you. Your good works will never bridge the gap. Your church attendance, your faith heritage, none of that is going to add enough soldiers to your side of the battlefield. And here's the staggering, almost unbelievably good news. The terms of peace that the victorious king offers, they're not what we expect. He doesn't demand our destruction, our groveling humiliation. He just says, surrender to me, and I won't treat you as a conquered enemy. I'll adopt you as a son. I'll call you my daughter. I'll give you a place in my kingdom. That's the gospel. That's grace. The king who could destroy you chose to die for you instead. But as amazing and as free as grace is, it still requires surrender. You have to wave the white flag. And Jesus brings both of these parables together with one of the most sobering verses in the entirety of Scripture. In the same way, any of you who does not give up everything he has cannot be my disciple. He doesn't say those of you who give up the obviously sinful things, the things you're already kind of tired of. He says everything. Now, in the Greek, what that word means is everything. Giving up everything means there's nothing in your life that is off limits to the king. No relationship too precious, no possessions you can't release, no ambition that you won't sacrifice. The builder had to give up his pride. The king has to give up his illusion of strength. And we have to give up both. The emotional enthusiasm that runs hot and cold and the proud self-sufficiency that keeps us at an arm length from grace. You got to lay it down. The things that you're ashamed of, the things that you're proud of, the sins that you hate and the righteousness that you boast in, it's living your life with open hands. Jesus is ultimately asking a deeper question, not about your behavior or your habits or your schedule. He's asking a question about your throne. Who is actually in charge of your life? Not who do you say is in charge. Not what answer do you give when somebody at church asks. Honestly, on a random Tuesday evening when you're making decisions about money and your time and your priorities, whose voice carries the most weight? That's the cost. And that's the whole cost. Because being a disciple is going to cost you your career. Some of you feel this genuine pull towards something that you believe God is calling you to do, but it doesn't pay as well and it doesn't have the status of your current job. And you've known for years that you're chasing the wrong thing, but you haven't stopped chasing those things because stopping requires counting a cost that feels too high. It can cost you your relationships. Some of you are in a relationship right now, romantic relationships, deep friendships, close family dynamics that you know down in your gut, these relationships are pulling you away from God. And the reason you're still there has nothing to do with what's right. It has to do with the fact that the alternative is lonely or hard or awkward or sad. It'll cost your reputation. We're living through one of the most image-conscious moments in all of human history. Sometimes following Jesus will make you look strange, and not in a fun, quirky way, but in a way that costs you. Are you willing to pay that? Because counting the cost means being honest about whether you're following Jesus or following a version of Jesus that your social circle finds acceptable. It's going to cost you your comfort. We live in the most comfortable civilization in human history. We have engineered our lives to maximum ease. And the result is a level of physical comfort that our great-grandparents would have never dreamed of. Combined with this level of spiritual restlessness that we can't explain. And so Jesus calls people into lives that are genuinely inconvenient, into generosity that actually pinches, into community that requires showing up when you'd rather stay at home. I want to be honest with you. I've been in a lot of churches and I've been part of the problem myself. We've made it incredibly easy to say yes to Jesus. I mean, we get the sermon right, we sing emotional songs, we create a great environment. And then we told people, Jesus will fix your marriage, settle your anxiety, fill that hollow place that you've been carrying around for years. All you got to do is come forward and give your life to Jesus. And people would. And then 6 months later, most of them walk right out the back door. Now, it's not that we lied to those people. I think Jesus really does heal, really does bring peace, really does fill the empty places in our lives. All of that is completely true. We just leave out the fine print. We forget to mention that following Jesus means dying to yourself. It means picking up a cross. We don't mention that giving your life to Jesus means that you're going to lose some friends. You're going to have to walk away from some opportunities where you would make money or status or relationships or a version of yourselves that you've spent years building. We get the excitement right. We just forget to talk about the cost. I mean, look at the state of Christianity around us. There are millions of people that would call themselves a Christian. They attend church with some regularity. They follow Christian social media accounts. They genuinely feel good about Jesus. And yet their lives are no different from people who never gave Jesus a second thought. People who say they're a Christian have the same financial anxiety, the same materialism, the same ethical compromises at work, the same addictions and struggles, the same levels of anxiety and depression. Maybe we have a thin layer of spiritual vocabulary on top, but we're not different. And I'm not saying this to beat anybody up. I'm saying it because it's diagnostic. It all points to something that went wrong at the foundation. A lot of people want to be in the crowd, but they don't want to be disciples. They want the easy yes when what they need is an honest one. So they build their spiritual lives on excitement of the moment. And then life happens and the feeling fades and they found out they've only built a house on sand. These are the half-finished towers that exist everywhere. And genuinely, it breaks my heart because most of these people aren't bad people. Most of them simply never heard what Jesus said in Luke 14. No one ever sat them down and said, before you start this relationship, you need to count the cost. So here's what I want to leave you with. And I say this to myself just as much as I say it to you. The question is not, are you a Christian? Because honestly, that question has gotten too easy, too vague, Too many people can say, yeah, I'm a Christian without meaning it. The question is, are you a disciple? Have you looked at the cost clearly, felt the weight of the cross, and understood that following Jesus is not a supplement to your life? It's a complete reorientation of your life. The crowd that was traveling with Jesus, they're close enough to hear him teach. By all outward appearances, they're followers, but proximity is not discipleship. You can be in the crowd and not be a disciple. You can know all the right songs, show up every week, sit in the same pew, say the right things, and still at the core of it, be living fundamentally for yourself. And Jesus is turning the fine print into big, bold letters. He's not inviting you to hang out and just pick up what feels useful. The invitation is for complete devotion. We are being called to follow Jesus past the comfortable places, past the places where our reputation is secure, our comfort is intact. Follow Jesus all the way to the cross. Here's the last thing I want you to hear from this passage. Jesus tells you the cost up front. Before the foundation is poured, before the army marches, Jesus isn't hiding anything. This is not some kind of bait and switch operation. He puts the price tag on the table before he ever asks for your answer. Jesus is asking, are you willing to give up your life, your actual, specific, irreplaceable life? And yet he spent his entire ministry telling people whoever loses their life for his sake will find it, which is a flat out paradox. But it's absolutely true. The person who tries to save their life by keeping their career decisions and their relationships and their comforts safely under their own control, that person ends up with something that looks very full from the outside. It's just very hollow on the inside. But the person who does the terrifying thing, who sits down and counts the cost honestly, who feels the weight of what's being asked and says yes anyway, that person finds something they can never manufacture on their own. Something that doesn't depend on the circumstances being just right or a feeling being present. Something genuine, durable, good, that's a foundation worth building on. Today, as we go to the tables, we're being reminded of how much God has sacrificed so that we could say yes to him. We're being reminded that he picked up the cross first and he was willing to lay down his own life so that we could answer the call to be a disciple. The table shows us without a doubt that this relationship will cost us everything. But what we receive is so much more than we could ever hope for or imagine. And so I pray this week that you have a wonderful time around the table today as you think about the call to be a disciple of Christ. As you look at the bread and you look at the cup, and you are reminded that these things are provided to remind you of what it really costs to call yourself a child of God. I pray that you have a great week this week, that you think about what it really costs to claim what you claim, to be what you claim to be, to take on that mantle of Christ and to live differently than the world that we live in, to live not as a member of society under society's rules, but to live in this world as light and darkness, as a disciple of Christ. And I hope that leads you to having a wonderful week. Never forget how deeply you're loved. And I look forward to seeing you very soon.